Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Facts on the Ground. I am Misty Winston, and I am joined as always by my co-host, Jesse Zerwell. Today, I'm very excited. We have a special guest who came highly recommended by my dear friend and comrade, Vanessa Beeley, who I adore. So anybody that's okay with Vanessa is okay with me. So today, we're very honored to welcome the founder of Syriana Analysis, Kevork Almassian. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time.
It's my pleasure to be your guest, and also your name. I came across your name through Vanessa Billy, so it was a win-win situation, let's say.
Look at Vanessa bringing people together.
Yes.
I adore her. So if I told Jesse earlier, anybody that's okay with Vanessa is okay by me. She's great. So just to get started, just for anybody who is maybe not familiar with who you are and Syriana Analysis, can you give us like a little bit of backstory about you and then why you started Syriana Analysis?
Actually, I come from Aleppo, Syria, and I was born and raised there. And I studied international relations and diplomacy in Syria, and I did a master in political science and also studied European affairs in France. And in 2017, actually, I was working online all the time since the beginning of the war, and I was writing in English. My post was basically mostly on Facebook. But then I had to do one step, let's say I have to take one step further in order to reach the American and European people, in order to address them directly about what's going on in Syria, because I was born and raised there, and I know the language, and I know the political system there, and I know the different opposition parties in Syria. So I started in January 2017 a YouTube channel by the name of Syriana Analysis, and I was really not expecting that the channel could reach to 7.6 million people now in 4 years. And most viewers were from the United States. And it was also a lucky game, because I started the channel when Trump came in power, and he was like, fake news to the mainstream media. So people were like radically going to social media, and a lot of people started to follow YouTube to get their news or analysis. And I think if you work on YouTube and you are honest with your audience, and when they see that you don't have any agenda, what could be the agenda of a Syrian who is trying to explain to the audiences that what's going on in Syria is a regime change war, and your governments are selling you this war as some sort of a revolution or a civil war in Syria. So I had to put, let's say, dots on or I have to explain to the people, because in my opinion, the people also like you to respect their brains. When you talk to them respectfully and you explain in an objective way, although sometimes we are all biased and we all have political opinions, you can't be really 100% objective when it comes to your own country. But when the people see that you are on the track that calls for the end of hostilities and to restore peace and security, people start to believe you more than the mainstream media. And it's very ironic, because when you talk to these people and they really form opinions about what's going on, not only in Syria, but sometimes the entire Middle East, they feel insulted when they go and watch the mainstream media and see exactly, sometimes 180 degree the opposite of the narrative that you are like, it could be the same news, but it's just like one word that could change the entire way that in your subconscious could think. I was reading the Deutsche Welle, which is the German government financed channel, just a few days ago, when Israel was bombing Syria.
Mm-hmm.
And Israel, and just if you read the article, only in the title they say Israel retaliated against Syria, and we all know that Syria never bombed Israel like in an offensive way. It was like Syria was defending itself, and one of the S-200 missiles followed an Israeli F-16 into the occupied territories, and it fell near the Dimona nuclear plant. That doesn't mean Syria attacked Israel. It was a defensive missile. But just one word in the entire article could change the way you understand the conflict in the region.
Yeah, and it's done on purpose.
100%.
Of course it's done on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
If people think that this is some sort of a journalistic mistake, it could be once or twice, but for 10 years, and I mean, if you work in the mainstream media, you could be a good person, but structurally, it's very corrupted. And I live now in Germany for more than 5.5 years. And I can guarantee you that I applied to many job vacancies and I've been accepted 0 times. And and I know the people who are accepted, and especially if they are nationals from my own country, you either have to zip it, you don't need to have an opinion about your country, or you need to be on the regime change camp. Otherwise, you will never find a job in journalistic field in Germany. That's impossible.
I didn't know it was so. I didn't know it was so locked down like that in terms of the truth of what's happened in Syria, in Germany. That's interesting. Is there a reason for that?
Actually, it's very. It was also very surprising to me, because in Syria we always think it's just the American government or the American media. But I studied, for example, the history of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a very radical organization, considered a terrorist organization by many Middle Eastern governments. And when we read, for example, the literature of the 80s, and the Muslim Brotherhood, they had their media office here in Bonn while they were carrying terrorist attacks in Syria. So especially the UK, France, and Germany, they know who are these people, but they invest in these people because one day they know if there would be a change in the Middle East, these people are their assets. And we have seen this clearly in Egypt when the first, let's say, least corrupted elections happened in Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood came to power because they were the most organized, they were the most trained and financed and supported by Western governments. And this is not a conspiracy theory. The Brits supported the Muslim Brotherhood in the 20s of the 20th century in order to hit the pan-Arabist, nationalist, and socialist groups in the region, because they didn't want to see the Soviets coming to have influence in the region. Therefore, they started to pump up Islamist groups in the region in order to make the region busy in an internal conflict between left-wing and right-wing Islamists. And now, today, we are still stuck in this conflict. And if you see the Middle East, and I'm saying this very unfortunately, if you see the videos and the pictures from the 50s and the 60s and even the 70s, the people were much more progressive back then than now, because all this support that comes to these Islamist groups in the region through the allies of the West, especially Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey.
I was going to mention Saudi Arabia, especially with regard to what you were saying about when the Muslim Brotherhood was getting more and more propped up. A lot of, the Mujahideen, they were being funneled through Saudi Arabia. And, not just that, there were things like textbooks that were depicting Russians as, or Soviets, if you will, as basically people to be killed, evil people to be killed. And in Saudi Arabia, I think was matching dollar for dollar what the US was putting in. But
yes.
I just you brought that up. I didn't want to leave that point out because I think that's very significant.
Recently, Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, I think this was 2 years ago, he said it live that he will stop exporting Wahhabism in the region. And he said this was a duty that Saudi Arabia that has been tasked for by the United States in the last decades. And Saudi Arabia has built schools called in Arabic madrasas, and these madrasas are schools for indoctrinating the let's say the younger people, not in Saudi Arabia, but in the entire Middle East, North Africa, and even in Central Asia and the Caucasus, till Xinjiang, like this belt of the United States that is trying to encircle China, Russia, Iran, and Syria. It's happening through these Islamist forces. And some people will call you a conspiracy theorist, but I mean, I'm sorry, but Hillary Clinton herself, she admitted this maybe 10 years ago when she was asked about Afghanistan. The people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago.
Mhm.
And it's not like they stopped funding it. They still support this group. And only recently, the former special envoy of the United States to Syria, James Jeffrey, I think his name, yes, James Jeffrey, he admitted that Al-Qaeda in Syria is an asset for the US strategy. So the Americans will give their hands to anyone who wants to fight against their enemy, regardless of the
Yes.
ideology and regardless of the political position.
And I think that's why you mentioned that you were surprised that your channel kind of caught on and, people were, flocking to it and subscribing. I think that's because people are hungry for legitimate information. In the US, people are extremely propagandized. I mean, it's everywhere. It's so pervasive throughout our culture. It's on every mainstream news network. I mean, our mainstream news networks are nothing but state-run propaganda, essentially. They're owned by corporations. Corporations also own our government. And so it is state-run propaganda. But it's in, every newspaper, every TV commercial, every TV show. A couple of weeks ago, somebody posted a clip from some show where they're talking about, how evil Cuba is or something. And it's, it's like this sitcom, like this family sitcom, like this 30-minute, family friendly sitcom where they're talking about the evils of Cuba. And it's just amazing how pervasive the propaganda is in the United States. And I think that's why, independent media has really flourished over the past 4 or 5 years. And I think you're right. I think, as awful as he is, I think Donald Trump had a lot to do with that, because he was wrong about a lot. He was right about fake news.
Yes.
Our mainstream media is absolutely fake news. So I think that people are starting to catch on to that, and they're starting to recognize that they're being force-fed disinformation and misinformation, and they really are hungry for reality. People want to be told the truth. You're right. You have to respect your audience. I mean, you can't force feed them confirmation bias porn. You have to give them the truth as you see it. I mean, like you said, we all have our biases and we all have, our own opinions and the way that we think about things. But if you're just coming from an honest place and telling people your truth the way that you see it, I think people respect that a great deal.
Actually, I wrote an article in 2015 in a leading Lebanese newspaper about who owns the American media, and this was in 2015, early 2015. There were 7 corporations controlling 90% of the news outlets in the United States, and I think there are now 8 corporations. So it become a little bit more, let's say, democratized now.
A little more diverse.
Yes, but that is why the people started to shift towards the social media. But even on social media, I'm sure you also guys know, like, my channel now has over 32,000 subscribers, and a lot of people, even they activate notification bell and they send me messages, Kevork, we're not receiving your videos, we're not receiving notifications, we're not seeing it. If we need to type in the name of your channel and go and check it. So, like, a few days ago, YouTube's, I think, general director, she granted herself a prize of being the
freedom
most
of expression.
or something. But they are suppressing it. There is no way. They are able to play with the algorithms, and they're able to suppress the voices. At the beginning, you might have a few subscribers. They don't really come after you, but when they see that you're reaching to people, they start to suppress it. That's very obvious.
Yeah, and
Yes.
it's such bullshit too when people resort to the argument that it's the algorithm. Well, who made the algorithm? People made the algorithm. So in the end,
And there shouldn't be an algorithm. That shouldn't even be a
Right.
thing. It should just be, you type in the information that you're looking for and the information should come up. And you're right. The censorship on YouTube has gotten so draconian. It is really not terrifying. It is terrifying. The way that they're coming after people and demonetizing channels, and they're, saying that they're promoting medical misinformation or election fraud misinformation or whatever. And it's just people having conversations, and you may not agree with their opinions. You may not agree with the way that they're covering something, or the way whatever they believe about whatever the situation was that they're covering, but they have a right to talk about it and to cover it. And, they get away with it because they're a private company.
Yes.
And that's really where the battle's going to be, is getting people to realize that these are not private companies. They are completely intertwined with our governments across the globe. It's not just in the United States. Google Google has a stranglehold over a great deal of Western countries. And so they're not private companies. Once you have that much power and control and influence over our government, you don't get to call yourself a private company anymore. And when you have, Facebook, for example, directly partnering with somebody like the Atlantic Council or, something like that, no, you're no longer a private company. We
Yes.
have to get past that, and we have to start pushing back against that narrative, because that's how they're able to justify the amount of censorship that they're doing. I'm really glad you brought this up, actually, because I wanted to talk to you about censorship and if your channel had experienced any, just given what you cover, and it's really gotten pretty bad.
My channel was approved for monetization only in November 2020. So in the last 4 years, they didn't approve for monetization at all. And the email that I received that I'm talking about sensitive topics. So they didn't accept my request for monetization. But even after their approval, 90% of the videos, when I schedule them, it's this yellow sign behind next to the video. So the video is not monetized. I have to apply for a manual request, and it takes 48 hours. And in the first 48 hours, the video has already been watched.
Yeah.
So you're not getting anything, basically. It's just like they're really manipulating you,
Yeah, the odds are completely stacked against you. And it's interesting how it is now with content related to Syria and the war that's been happening there, because I remember looking up videos on YouTube in late 2012, I'll say, and just to see what kind of carnage was happening there, because I was basically getting the story straight from Democracy Now, and things didn't sound right. And the point being that there was just an endless litany of videos that people made on their phones or had cameras and posted, some of them with like very terrible things happening. And the description would be like, Syrian army soldier throws student out of window, but there was no way to confirm it. Like, you can't, that would just be somebody's description. It was like all across the map. You could just watch people getting killed in Syria or supposedly in Syria. And there was YouTube didn't give a shit about censoring anything. It wasn't trying to manipulate a
That's
narrative.
funny, isn't it? It's really funny that they don't censor the establishment narrative. It's very much the same thing with Russiagate. They censor people now for promoting conspiracy theories. Well, why isn't MSNBC censored for promoting Russiagate for 5 years?
Mhm.
Why doesn't it work that way? It's very bizarre. And that's, I think, one of the ways that we're going to have to use to get people to recognize how ridiculous this is, how the censorship is only one-sided. And, we have to get people to stop cheering it on.
Why didn't they take down all these outlets that they cheered and celebrated the bombing of Syria after the Duma incident? And now in 2021, it's clear like the sunshine of the sun that it was staged by the white movement and the Jaish al-Islam, or Islam's army back then, in Duma. But still, this is only one-sided. And unfortunately, we are living in a jungle of wolves. And you really have to be a wolf and be very cautious of what you're saying during your videos, because they are really watching. And if you do one small mistake, they will delete you. They will cancel you right away. So that's why, especially in regards to the health crisis now that is happening around the world, I'm really avoiding to talk about it publicly on YouTube, because I can guarantee you in 1 week, my channel will be deleted. Although science is not static, like science is not like something that doesn't develop. It could be something today and it could be developed in the coming days. So if you don't let open discussion about these issues, that means you're really pushing for one-sided narrative that fits the pharmaceutical industry, the interests of the pharmaceutical industries. And calling me at least an anti-vaxxer, this is really ridiculous, because I've had all my necessary vaccines. And I am also taking my flu vaccine per year because the flu is hitting me very hard every year. And sometimes I stay 3 weeks in bed because of the flu. So I'm, of course, not anti-vaxxer, but I want to have a safe vaccine before injecting anything in my body that is not, the studies are not yet done. If the studies are done and it's safe 100% as they claim, there won't be new updates every day and new instructions by the health authorities in Germany. Some days they say the AstraZeneca could be used for people under 60, and the next week it's for over 60.
Right.
What
I
kind
know.
what kind
Well,
of
okay.
ridiculous
And you're
is this?
right. You're right, though. It doesn't matter. There's anybody could ever call me an anti-vaxxer either. I used to be a pro-vaccine activist. I have a child who's autistic, and they often try to use autism as this like tool against vaccines, which infuriates me. My child's existence isn't something to like fearmonger, like that's ridiculous. So I very much, I made a list in 2015 that anti-vaxxers made of people to watch out for. Like that's how not anti-vax that I am. And people will still call me an anti-vaxxer because I question the COVID-19 vaccines. And it's because I did all that work and because I know that they haven't done their due diligence and the proper amount of testing and all of that, that I am skeptical of it. And what baffles me the most about this is a lot of people will spend time being angry at people who are questioning the vaccine or the masks or the lockdowns or whatever it is. And I really think that people should spend more energy being mad at the system that creates such distrust that people question those things to begin with. If we had a government and a media that told people the truth and didn't lie and obfuscate and manipulate constantly, there wouldn't be people who question these things every time something like this comes up. But that's not the case. And when the media is lying to you constantly, of course, there's going to be people who immediately dig in their heels and say, no, thank you. They can't trust those people. So don't be mad at them. Be mad at the system that created the environment that causes such distrust that they can't even get people to believe in something, like wearing a mask or whatever. And all of it's kind of ridiculous anyways, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Germany is a federal state, and we are seeing, at least I'm myself, like my German friends, I can guarantee you the vast majority of them, they believe everything the media tells them. And they're like, why would the media lie, Kevork? Why do you think the media would lie? What's the interest behind it? I'm like, dude, where were you in the last 3 decades?
Right?
Like, were you sleeping and now all of a sudden you woke up for, like, why would they lie?
Well,
Let's
see, there's the Gulf of Tonkin and there's incubator babies and there's
just
weapons
hand them
of mass destruction.
hand them each a copy of manufacturing consent.
Yes. I think that's a problem. A lot of people need to, Noam Chomsky gets on my damn nerves now, and he needs, please, like Noam Chomsky, shut the fuck up challenge. But he, like, if you.
Well, Misty, why would you want to say that?
He had a famous video that I watched him in 2011. And I'm saying this with full pain in my chest because I'm one of the fans of Chomsky for a long time, and I have read many of his books. But in 2011, when he was with Norman Finkelstein together, and they were both saying that Assad has no legitimacy and he didn't come to power in a democratic way, and etc. etc. And I was like, do you think the Middle East, is there one single state that there is a liberal democracy, as Chomsky is saying?
Right.
Like, it's a completely different cultural system there. Even our relationships, family relationships, are different. Our relationship to God is different. We have a completely different mentality, and we have to develop our own democracies if it fits for us. Even if the people want democracy, it's a process. It's not like a cake you put it in the oven and then in 5 minutes ready. No, this is a human development, and the people in the Middle East should develop the system that suits them and not bring a foreign-made system it will not fit, especially that the religion still plays a major role, and the people could take their opinion and form political opinion from the cleric, or regardless, Christian or Muslim, if they go to a church or to a mosque. So how can I really form a democracy if this cleric tells them, go and vote for the Muslim Brotherhood, like that, like what happened in Egypt and like what happened in Syria. Where do the people think the protests started? 99% of the protests started from the mosques, and the imams were calling for jihad. You could hear it with your bare ears. You can hear it clearly. People are calling for jihad. People are calling for massacring the minorities, etc., etc. And then they come and like blaming you for being with Assad. I mean, I was born in a Christian family. I'm an agnostic person. Regardless of my beliefs, if they capture me, the so-called rebels, and if they just check my ID, just my ID, and it's written Christian, you're dead. There is no way to talk to these people. How do you want me to be with this American supported rebels in Syria when they really want to ethnically cleanse you? And that happened. Sorry, my grandparents survived the Armenian genocide by the Ottoman Empire, and I would not fall for the same mistake again because my grandparents were building churches over the top hills of the mountains, not carrying guns or not talking and protesting about it. And of course they were massacred, but I would say never again. I would never shut up, and I would never. My gun is my pen, and is what I do in media, and others are fighting. My colleagues, my friends in my school. So of course we will not allow this to happen again.
I think it's quite interesting that you have both Armenian and Syrian heritage, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And I say that because the narratives of both have been made murky, I think purposely murky. I know there was an Armenian genocide. I don't deny that. I don't have any skepticism about it, just like I don't have any skepticism or denial with regard to the Holocaust and the 6 million Jews and then several other million Slavs and Gypsies who were exterminated. But you so seldom hear about the Armenian genocide, and when you do, it's obfuscated in such I think like conflict narratives that have been made purposely conflicted. And I think we see the same thing with what's been happening in Syria. We've been seeing the same thing over the years, and like I've had to do some really deep digging on both to figure out, what I think actually happened. And
my friend Steve calls that manufacturing confusion.
Right.
And
right.
That's
I think
part
that's
of their MO.
Right. I think that's a perfect term. So maybe you can speak to that a little bit from your own experience.
You mean the Armenian genocide?
Or just the way that they obfuscate the narrative and try to make it confusing so that people don't know what's reality and how they're able to kind of manipulate circumstances that way.
Actually, that wasn't really a question so much as like a connection.
I do that all the time. It's okay. That's why I had your back just then.
Thank you.
Actually, confusing people, especially at the beginning of the war in Syria, was easy because back then people were they formed an opinion that there is a dictatorship in Syria. So any alternative could be better. This is the way they presented to the people. But also the video materials that they were posting in order to mobilize the people, either internally or even to the outside world to sell the wars. We have to remember that in 2011, we didn't have these advanced mobile cameras. We didn't have the advanced cameras on the mobiles. So all the videos that you could watch from 2011, they're like 240p. It's like pixelized. You need to put some microscope to see what's going on. But the title says, the Assad militias are committing massacre, and then everything you hear is just like somebody is shooting and people are falling. You don't even know who is shooting and who is falling on like they did even in Ukraine. So it was very easy at the beginning. If you have a sniper that is shooting both sides, it was very easy to mobilize two sides against each other. And I would never rule out that possibility, because on the first week of the protests in Syria against the government, we were all like, Yes, of course we want reform in Syria. Of course we want more political freedoms. Of course we want more media freedoms in Syria. And myself, I'm a graduate of international relations. And of course I would like to engage in politics and have more opportunities. We were all like enthusiasts. We wanted change in Syria. But these dreams evaporated very quickly. I was like one of the people who was downloading the videos from YouTube to my SD card every day, and I have an archive now that if I go back and watch all these videos, you will never know who is shooting who in these videos. Like even the Syrian security officers are running, escaping snipers, and they're receiving bullets on their necks. Like I'm wondering in 2011 and 2012, what kind of military training any opposition could have to shoot with a sniper on the necks of the officers or the security who was running with sticks. They didn't have guns, and they weren't carrying any guns. So my personal observation is these people were either really well trained beforehand, before they come to Syria, maybe they were Syrians in Saudi Arabia or elsewhere, or there was a third party. That's not possible for someone to use a sniper and be able to shoot a few security officers running very fast on their neck. That's not going to happen by an amateur who just calls himself a rebel and just carried his AK-47. That's not going to happen. But when people started to use more sophisticated, let's say, equipment to document, the government understood what kind of propaganda is going on against it. So they started also to give support to the journalists on its side to also document what's going on. The Brits in 2014, they knew that this individual documentation is not enough. They need to have an organizational, something that is an organization to document this. That's why they created something called the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is a one-man person in Coventry in the UK.
Yeah.
Like if you see the name, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, wow, that should have a credibility, right? And two, the White Helmets. I mean, these two organizations changed the entire narrative in Syria. They can manufacture any narrative they want, because if you have the territory, like you're occupying, let's say Idlib, even if you bomb a building by yourself and save some kids under the rubble, you can say anything you want in this video. You can say the Assad regime bombed this building because it's a babies are here, or even cat sanctuary. They even made up stories about the cat sanctuary Assad is bombing in Aleppo, and the last cat that Assad killed in Aleppo, and the last clown in Aleppo. Like it's if you watch these reports, and if you watch it with an open brain, it's like you don't know either to laugh or cry. If you watch they were saying people are throwing themselves from the top roof of the buildings so that Assad militias do not rape the women. So the women are throwing themselves from the top roof of the buildings. This is in Aleppo in 2016. Zero evidence, nothing. It's just talk. It's just like people say it and repeat it, and it happens. What's the difference between this strategy and the strategy of the Nazis?
Right.
Not much. Well, then, I mean, Germany learned from us, from the United States. I mean, that's where they got their methods. So it's not surprising. And the white helmets are amazingly awful. I mean, it's like Hollywood grade propaganda. It's incredible. And the fact that they've been exposed so thoroughly and people still buy into it is really disheartening. I mean, they're on camera, like caught, getting like set up, like getting in position and like making sure they're on their marks and all this stuff. It's like a Hollywood production. And there are still people who buy into the white helmets and treat them as if they're a legitimate organization, like a humanitarian effort.
They're also on camera at executions at carried out by these Wahhabi proxies that the US backs. Someone shot in the back of the head and they run on scene wrap them up in a blanket and take them off camera.
Come on, don't be so mean to the white helmets. They were there because when they killed these Syrian army officers, at least they carried them to the ambulance, right?
Yeah,
Right.
right.
They did their
They're
job.
so good. It's just such really, they're just humanitarians all around, just great people.
They
But
tried.
really,
One of
it's
the
disturbing.
senior white helmets, rescuers is here in Berlin. And there were very tough discussion between the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs was saying, we're not going to accept this guy. He's a terrorist. He has links to the terrorists. So, okay, he's our guy in Syria, but let him stay in Syria. We don't want him in Germany. But the Ministry of Interior, which is controlled by the Social Democrats, which is a left-wing group that you really want to kill yourself when you hear a left-wing group supports this white helmet. And they they lobbied against the foreign ministry, and they brought him here in Berlin, and he lives in a place that nobody knows. He's like, maybe they even changed his face. I don't know. Nobody can ask any questions. Nobody can know where he lives. Nobody is allowed to question or ask questions to him. And he's here now with his family. And I made a video with Vanessa Billy about this issue. And I was really expecting a call from the police because it's not funny. They follow my work. When I tweet something about it, they call me sometimes. Like
really,
and you know that they're following you, but they are like. Why the other day some people were even on your page were accusing me of being a radical right wing. You remember that?
Yes, those people are just honestly, and I do have to apologize to you for that, because honestly, that group of people has literally been hate stalking me for years. And so
totally
anything
fine.
that
I'm used to it now for 2 years.
I'm sure you
now.
are, but I still felt really bad. I told Vanessa, I'm like, oh, my stalkers are now attacking him.
I'm
so
totally fine with it, but it is crazy because in Germany, when I arrived in Germany in late 2015, and I've been to many refugee camps, and I've been a translator in also refugee schools and camps, etc., etc. I saw with my own eyes like very radical Islamists infiltrated ranks of the refugees. So when I say there are radicals among the refugees, that doesn't mean I'm attacking the refugees. I'm saying let's filter, guys. There are people who are fighting in Syria and they are now here. And these guys are like very openly and vocally supporting Jabhat al-Nusra, al-Nusra, Ahrar al-Sham, Jaish al-Islam. And if you understand Arabic like me, you hear them talking about it. So guys, let's be careful because these guys could pose a danger. And it happened many times. One person exploded himself in Ansbach in Germany. He was one of these so-called rebels in Syria. One of the white helmets rescuers, he tried to bomb the Berlin airport. And when they captured him, he killed himself in the prison.
Of course he did. He Epsteined himself.
Yeah.
He was Clinton, obviously.
Oh, we gotta add another one to the body count. Yeah.
What's the name of the individual who's currently in Germany, the one who's receiving government protection?
I have to double check. I'm very bad with names, but what's the name of the leader of the White Helmets? He shares the same family name of the leader of the White Helmets.
I just blanked. I've heard Vanessa talk about it so many times, and my mind just went
blank.
Yeah, Vanessa's been getting destroyed for covering the white helmets in a real way, and she's fierce, and I love watching her because they keep coming for her and she just keeps batting them away.
So his name is this is on the BBC. Germany has taken in an ex-leader of the Syrian White Helmet
James Le Messier is the...
Despite earlier suspicions that he had jihadist links, Khaled Saleh. His name is Khaled Saleh.
That's Khaled?
Yeah.
And then lowercase a? L dash. Is it dash SALEH?
Let me check again. So Khalid,
ID.
small A-L, Saleh, Saleh,
Okay.
with his
Oh,
family.
okay. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you.
He arrived in December
Yeah, we'll do some
2020.
digging on that. We're big
Interesting.
nerdy researchers, so we like to dig into stuff like that. Yeah, but the white helmets, I mean, you mentioned seeing leftists prop them up, and I don't know how closely you follow the American progressive movement.
I do.
It's not progressive in any way. It's not left in any way. But like even people like Bernie Sanders are supporters of the white helmets, and
That's true.
it's really depressing. I mean, it's really over the past since Bernie ran in 2015. As a leftist, I never thought that like we would see anybody even remotely kind of sort of leftish running and like having like a legitimate shot. And I knew Bernie wasn't really super left. He's, you know, kind of a Democrat, and he's a imperialist, and he, you know, he's not great, but he's definitely you know, maybe save Dennis Kucinich, one of the leftist people who's run. And so seeing the American left movement prop up people like the white helmets, it's really depressing. It really does prove that the left in the United States is very, very small. And it's it again comes back to that propaganda. It has been systematically destroyed over decades. It's something that I think's been going on really since like the 50s and 60s. Started kind of with McCarthyism,
True.
and you know, then the hippie movement and all of that stuff. You know, introducing crack into black neighborhoods. All of these things has really done a number on the American left and the anti-war American left. So you do follow the American
Yes.
progressive movement.
Actually,
What's your take?
if-
I'm interested. Like, what is your take as somebody from the outside? What's your opinion of the American progressive movement?
I mean, look, starting from the AOC till all of this team, what do they call themselves? The gang
squad.
or the squad,
The
etc.
squad.
Yeah.
I call them the squat.
Yeah, it's more like a makeup on the face of the liberal or the Democrats, you know. So there is this perception or belief by some people that you can bring the Democratic Party to the left. Like you will never be able to push the Democratic to the left. The Democratic Party will bring you to the right. It's not possible to reform it from inside. There is a structural imperialism, let's say, in the deep state of the United States, and the military industrial complex that is wading in a lot in the political life in the United States in order to have an imperialist foreign policy. I mean, people need to understand that the United States is an empire. It's like now I want to quote Chomsky, because he says the people doesn't know that they don't know, and they don't know that they don't know. Like it's really like people don't know that they have an empire there. That's really the sad part of it. Some people think that they're really helping us, but they're really sorry. You really fucked up the entire Middle East. Starting from the 90s, the first time bombing Iraq, and the second, killing 500,000 children in Iraq by the sanctions. Children, we're talking about underage children that the United States killed. And then the 2003 occupation. The occupation of Iraq was the tipping point for the entire Middle East. And it was very expected that who is next after Iraq? It's either Syria or Iran. So these countries had to come together and be more radical in their foreign policies, and really try to make the life of the American occupation forces in Iraq harder. Because if they feel comfortable in Iraq, next is coming, it's like they're knocking the door of Syria or knocking the door of Iran, and that was very obvious. So but I never expected that this knocking the door could happen through a so-called revolution. We should have known this when things started in Libya, when they bombed Libya and they were really like pushing for the regime change rhetoric in Syria. We should have really empowered our internal, our domestic.
And speaking of blowback, one of the lead jihadis who fought in Syria to basically assassinate Gaddafi, he was with MI6, I believe, and given free passport by them to Libya, and then back from Libya to the UK, and then he happened to walk into an arena in Manchester and blow himself up at an Ariana Grande concert.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now I remember this incident. You're right.
Yeah, he fought in Libya and was fully backed by MI6, if I'm not mistaken. I get the 5 and 6 confused sometimes.
I'm convinced that these people, the governments, for example, in the UK, Germany, they know that these people are dangerous. However, when these people travel to the North Africa or Middle East and they kill tens of thousands of people because they're organized and they will have their groups, brigades, money, organization, etc., and training and ideology, everything. So collectively, they pose a grave danger in North Africa and Middle East. But when they come back to their own countries, let's say in the UK, they turn into a lone wolf. So whatever they can do, they could kill 10 people or 20 people per year, or maybe 50 people, 100 people per year. For this government, it's a collateral damage. They don't care about their people. If 100 people die per year, but at the same time, they're able to control the oil of Libya, they're able to control the Mediterranean through Syria, or they control Iraq and hit Russia, etc., etc. That's they don't even blink an eye if these guys come back. And I mean, in 2015, there was a famous interview by a German journalist. I'm really surprised that there was a journalist asking really serious questions. And
so rare these days.
Yes, he interviewed the head of the criminal office in Bavaria, in Bayern. And he asked him really tough questions, and he brought some names that these guys, we have 400 German jihadists who were watched by the German security apparatuses, watched day and night. And they have to come to the police every 2 or 3 days and sign on a paper that they are still here. How could these people travel to Syria? And how could they travel to Turkey? Because they don't have a passport. The German government even revoked their passports. And the answer was mind-blowing. It was like, yes, we know that they wanted to travel to Turkey and join ISIS. And for us, that was a good way to get rid of these radicals and make our people safer. He was very honest about it, like brutally honest about it. There was a woman of Tunisian descent, and she was also watched here in Germany. She was married to a very radical Salafist in Western Germany. He joined ISIS in 2014, and she joined him in Raqqa. And she stayed in Syria for 1.5 years, and she returned to Hamburg. And when she returned to Hamburg, she forgot her phone, or she lost her phone in Syria. So the Kurds found her phone, and obviously they sold her phone to a journalist in the Emirates. And the journalist, her name is Jinan Musa. She made a documentary from the content of her mobile only in the ISIS-held territory. She even received an email from an office in Germany called the Job Center. That means she was jobless. She was receiving money from the government because she is jobless. And they told her, we're going to cut your money because you traveled to Syria. They know that she's in Syria with ISIS. And she came back as if nothing happened. She just removed her veil, and she's working as a translator, and nobody touched her until this Jinan Musa came, and she threw a bombshell in Germany. Like this ISIS wife, she married 2 ISIS men in Syria, and she returned with no problems in Hamburg. And then the police had to make a statement, and they say, yes, guys, we know her case, we're following her. But then the pressure was very big, so that they captured her. So if this journalist didn't do her job and made a documentary about her, The
Right?
bullet would not have touched her.
That's very interesting, though, because I've noticed in the United States, when we have a lot of these mass shootings, there will be some who were on like terrorist watch lists for years. I forget the guys that did the Boston bombing. I forget their names. Tsarnaev, the Tsarnaev brothers. I think the FBI had spoken to them multiple times, and it's like they just don't. Yeah, we know about them, but whatever. It's no big deal. It's like it's almost as if they are hoping for these kinds of escalations because it causes so much instability and turmoil. And this helps them. All of that stuff helps them. It helps empire for there to be instability and for there to be chaos and for there to be radicalization and all of that stuff. You're right. It's like they want to arm, fund, and train these people to do their bidding and then just forget about them with their, just throw them away when they're done with them for like not caring that they're going to go cause more chaos. Like you have now radicalized this person. Do you think that they're just going to suddenly shut that off once you're done with them? Of course not. They're going to go and do other things and harm other people. Yeah, and it really is like they do not care. That's
how the Taliban came into existence and power, so to speak, in Afghanistan was, the US was done with the Mujahideen and done with the Soviets and left. And there were these just radicalized, weaponized men like Salafi jihadists left there. And yeah, I mean, what's going to blossom from that? But like what we saw with the Taliban. And then, then it was very easy from there to, distort the narrative and make the link to bin Laden. I mean, not that like I'm not saying bin Laden didn't have any association with the Taliban, but they make it seem like he was the leader of the Taliban and he never really had any sort of, he was Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda was kind of like the umbrella under which the Taliban was,
Well, and the best thing about the absolute devastating miseducation in this country, in the United States, is most people don't know the difference between those groups. They have no idea. They hear like a scary name like the Taliban or Al-Qaeda, and they have no idea what the difference is or what ideologies they hold or who they work for or where they come from, what country they're in. I mean, the United States, the populace of the United States is completely ignorant about most of that stuff by design. The mainstream media doesn't cover it. I mean, they got to talk about Joe Biden's scrunchies.
Right.
That's the important stuff.
But it matters though, because if you ask the average American, what kind of Islam does Hezbollah follow, just like in general, I would say like 99.9% would not know that.
Of course not.
They're Shia, right? But that matters when we're invading and occupying their lands, and which we shouldn't be doing in the first place. But then you don't know the difference and you create sectarian war, and then you point at these people in like such an Orientalist way and you say, look, see, they can't even figure out their own religions. And
that's what they're doing to Syria right now.
Yeah,
I think Kevork, you had a video on this not too long ago where you were talking about how they like to come and occupy your land and take your oil and your wheat and all this stuff, and then blame you, blame your country, blame Assad for not being able to, run things properly or whatever.
And it's even worse than that. They're calling it self-defense. It's like, if you fight the American forces in Syria, they call it the self-defense. It's like they're sitting in your home, they're taking your oil. Like people cannot really cook anymore because they don't have these heating materials, the fuel for their cars, the electricity. It's really human right. This is basic needs for the people. So they're depriving you of this. And when you shoot them, it's like a self-defense. What kind of logic is that? Self-defense, if you sit in the United States, And if we shoot on you in the United States, not when you're sitting in my home. And believe me, the Syrian people are very, very friendly people towards the Americans. Until this moment, if you go as an American in Syria and just walk in the street and tell anyone that you're American, and if you think that they will tell you anything, any bad words, you would be mistaken. People are really tolerant, and they will tell you like, oh, we know that your government is an asshole, but we also know that you don't have anything to do with the government. This is what they will tell you in Syria, despite of 10 years of war imposed on them on daily basis. Like, just imagine living 10 years under such circumstances. It's unimaginable. People don't know this stuff. They're sitting on their comfortable chairs behind their iMacs, and they're like trying to educate you about your country. This is what really irritates me. I'm very calm person and diplomatic, and I don't like to use mean words against anyone, but sometimes it makes you crazy, because I'm sitting here, I'm also working, and I'm trying to help my friends, and if I have any family members in Syria left with money, because they're not able to do anything because of this war and occupation. And I know people like not able to secure the milk of their newborn children. That's serious. And someone comes and still wants to preach that, oh guys, you're like, oh, Syria needs democracy. I'm sorry, Syria needs bread. Syria needs security. First, let's revive our economy. People really, how what's the percentage of the people that want to participate in elections, or sorry, in political life, comparing to how many people need bread?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and really what it is that Syria needs self-determination. It's not some Westerner's job to tell Syria what Syria needs.
Right.
You know,
But
like
that's what the
sitting in
Caesar,
your
that's what the Caesar sanctions are doing. And that's a huge part of
Mhm.
why Syria, which is trying to rebuild for the most part, it's like they get a little foothold and the US is like, fuck you. The US and its proxies are basically like, fuck you, we're not going to let you rebuild this country. We're still going to occupy the oil fields in the east. And yeah, I mean, just like I said before, the Orientalism and the conquest of it, like it's just so blatant. And
now they're using Israel to constantly attack. I wanted to ask you about that too. It seems like the attacks from Israel, it seems like a weekly thing. It's like the weekly I don't know, party for Israel to go and bomb Syria in the middle of the night.
It's like a new normal.
Yes, it's really disturbing. Can you talk a little bit about that and
And
the escalation that we've seen?
for me, it's like now rule number one: don't sleep before 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. Syria time, because maybe Israel bombs. Like, you need to report about it, like every day. And I can guarantee you, Israel is flying near the Golan Heights and the Lebanese airspace every day. And you have to watch the warplanes every day, because they do maneuvers, and it's like as if they're conducting real airstrikes. So you have to be always ready. You don't know when they're gonna bomb, So what was happening is, from in 2011, when the war started in Syria, Israel, through its proxies, they assassinated military scientists, those who were responsible for building long-range missiles, or engineers who work in developing the old Soviet weaponry that Syria has. They assassinated them in the middle of the cities. And there is no doubt that Israel was behind it, so similar to what they do in Iran. Then Israel started to bomb Syrian army posts in 2012, 13, 14. Although the Iranian and Hezbollah forces were like after 2012, and even the Iranians were after 2014. So they started bombing Syria before that. It wasn't like their excuse now that there are Iranian advisors, because the Iranian advisors are like a few hundred advisors, and they're not combating forces in Syria. Iran doesn't have combat forces in Syria. Two, Syria was really busy in its domestic war, and they had really to hide their air defense systems, because these so-called rebels, what they did is, invade the air defense bases, like they leave everything. If the Syrian army is using tanks, for example, if you attack the tanks, that could make sense from your point of view. But if you're attacking battalions that are exclusively air defenses are located there, that means somebody is sending you to destroy the air defense systems. And this is what they did in Eastern Ghouta. When Jaish al-Islam invaded the area, the first thing they did is occupy it and destroy it. They didn't even try to use it because they don't know how to use it. So they just destroyed the air defense. So Syria was trying really to hide the strategic weaponry that could repel such an attack. So Syria waited till 2018 when they really surprised the Israelis by gunning down one of their F-16. It was flying over a Syrian airspace. And when they shoot it, the Israeli warplane fell inside the occupied Palestinian territories. So since then, Israel never flies a warplane over a Syrian airspace. It stopped. They're bombing from the occupied Golan Heights, or from the Lebanese airspace, or from the regional waters. And they know that if they come anywhere close, they will be bombed. But this was only 2 weeks ago. Syria, for the first time, they fired a missile that followed the Israeli warplane all the way over the airspace of southern Lebanon. And the missile fell in southern Lebanon, okay? The S-200 missile. So I made a video about it. In my opinion, this was a change in the rules of engagement between Israel and Syria, because we were only trying to shoot the missiles, but now one of the missiles, when it's following the F-16, that's a change of behavior from the Syrian side. So Israelis were like, in my opinion, were still testing the Syrians. Are they seriously changing the rules of engagement, or it was a lone mistake? So again, last Thursday, Israel again was flying its warplanes over the Golan Heights, and even before they shoot the missile, Syria fired one of its S-200 missile, and now it's revealed that it's a SAM-5. It's a Soviet weapon, but developed by or upgraded by Syrian engineers, and it followed over the Palestinian occupied territories. And when it exploded in the air, it fell, like it could really fly for some kilometers. So it was like really near the Dimona nuclear plant, and I really don't want any missile to fall on the nuclear plant, believe me, because a lot of people will die, and Palestinians also will suffer from that. We don't want to cause any such a trouble. But now the Israelis should learn that their warplanes are not immune from this, and this is only the old S-200 systems. Remember, Syria has S-300, and people are asking me why Syria isn't using S-300. This is a $1 million question. There are many rumors and many reports about it. But in my humble opinion, I have studied the history of the civil war in Lebanon, and because Syria was engaged in this war, and Syria fought fiercely against the Israeli occupation there.
Syria was there until 2005, correct?
Yes, Syria never uses its strategic weaponry. If we read the history of Syria in lone conflicts, if Israel is really flying one warplane or two or three or four trying to shoot here and there, Syria would not use its strategic weaponry. Syria would only use that strategic weaponry when there is an all-out war. There is something called the tipping point when Israel is really invading Syria, and you need to use this weaponry. You need to keep the element of the surprise for your enemy. And also don't forget that if you use the S-300, they will know the locations of your weaponry, and they will try to destroy the batteries of this weaponry, and they're very expensive. And Syria cannot afford not to buy more S-300.
Yeah. I have to say, though, the way that Syria has been able to defend itself is really impressive. I mean, Vanessa talks about this all the time, that the Syrian air defense is great at intercepting these, bombs and missiles and whatever else is getting thrown at them. And that's really saying something given what they're up against.
And we always hear the Israeli Iron Dome lionized, but that is actually very faulty, very shitty, and very overrated technology. Democracy Now, for all its faults, did a really good story on this in the summer of 2014 when Israel was yet again slaughtering Palestinians in Gaza. And this guest, I think he was a physicist, I forget. But anyway, he broke down, the information that was obtained from Iron Dome interceptions and showed how it's basically this unreliable technologic piece of crap. And but everything we hear about it is like, oh, it's the most amazing thing. It's protecting the only democracy in the Middle East. You don't hear anything about Syrian defense systems. And it's constantly like, and there's always like the precursor to like every conversation about Syria, like, I'm not a fan of Assad, but like it's
Yes. I hate when people do that. It's so annoying. And everybody does it. I do it myself. It's like when I talk about Tulsi Gabbard. I don't support Tulsi Gabbard, but she blah 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 blah.
right.
And it's so annoying because you shouldn't have to do that. I mean, you should just be able to have an opinion on something that is, separate from everybody else's bullshit, bias about whatever you're talking about.
Yeah. I just
But since
think
we're
that
talking about Assad,
I was just making the point that the comparison there between the weaponry it's like that plays into the narrative, like Israel's weaponry always good, Syrian weaponry always bad.
yeah.
It's like, okay, then why do you want to occupy the Golan? Like, if Syrians are so crazy and dangerous, like, why are you occupying their land?
That's just more narrative management. I mean,
Yeah.
it's, that's how they do it. It's really,
And
it's
let's
really
remember
obvious.
this missile that fell in near Dimona. It's not even an attacking missile. It is a defensive missile,
Mhm.
and they were able to shoot it down either through the Iron Dome or through a combat F-16. I don't really understand how the Israelis failed to intercept this missile. It should be considered a scandal for the Israeli army there, because S-200 is like 40 years old technology. And it's a defensive missile. You're not even attacking Israel, and they even, like, despite that, they failed. And I was really surprised about it. I thought maybe because, as you also mentioned, I'm also indoctrinated to believe that Israel is this superpower that you cannot really defeat it. But the 2006 war, for example, proved that Israel could have the equipment, but the underground, the will plays also a role, because you can bomb the entire country and destroy it and turn it into rubble, but if you can't fight underground and occupy, and occupation is not only when you occupy an area. No, you need to occupy and you need to create a post there. So creating a post and staying there takes a lot of will and a lot of skills. And the Israelis, I don't think any Israeli person would like to go and occupy southern Lebanon or southern Syria now and stay there for 5 years, or every day there would be a missile. They don't feel that it's their territory. It's not their territory. So how can they fight for something that it doesn't belong to them? So for the Syrians and for the Lebanese, people need to understand that these territories are theirs and they're ready to die for it. That's a different from of someone who is serving in an army and came from maybe Ukraine or came from Poland or came from anywhere else and is serving now in the military.
Yeah,
and we saw in 2006 when Israel sent in ground forces and Hezbollah very quickly made mincemeat of them, and they retreated and then did as they always do and resort to carpet bombing. But I think anybody who's honest looks back at that war, which was Israel's war on Lebanon. It was not Lebanon imposing anything on Israel. And if you go back and look at the narrative of the kidnappings beforehand, it proves that. But yeah, Israel sent in its troops and got routed. And these people are culled from society. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're whatever profession. They have to serve, and they don't know how to fight face to face. Hezbollah trains every day to fight face to face, because like you said, they're fighting for their lives. They're ready to die for their country, and with reason. If you know the history, if you look back at the history, I think you would feel this. If you were in their position, you'd feel the same way. And
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
that's
so.
and I think that's a lot of what the West fails to understand or even try to understand, and that's why we don't have any kind of like realistic perspective on what's happening in the Middle East. We're
Yes.
just like, oh, they're just killing each other again, and there's nothing we can do about it. And it's a shame, because it's like the worst of humanity, and it
Mm-hmm.
not only affects people in the Middle East, but it also comes in the form of blowback, like we saw with 9/11. Or
Mm-hmm. 100%.
yeah.
Okay. Well, we've been going for a little over an hour, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. But I did want to ask you. I don't want to make you to ask you to make any predictions or anything, but we just always kind of like to get people's take on where you see the situation in Syria progressing with a Joe Biden administration. He's already illegally bombed them once. The progressive movement once again remained basically silent. There were a couple little chirps here and there. I think Ilhan Omar said something. I don't know if Rashida Tlaib did. AOC has been silent. Bernie Sanders, I think, said something about it being that Congress has the duty to whatever, some like very vague BS statement. But just where do you see a Joe Biden administration, which really it's not even a Joe Biden administration. I mean, he has soup for brains. But, what do you see the situation moving towards as we move forward?
I will tell about this bombing very fast, because it's very important, and I wanted to mention this. Joe Biden bombed this for a very simple reason, in my opinion. He bombed near Abu Kamal, and Abu Kamal is the crossing point between Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and the goods and a lot of reconstruction stuff from Iran comes through that border crossing. So this was a message to all these parties in the Middle East. Reconstructing Syria is a red line now. You're not allowed to reconstruct Syria. And the sanctions that they're imposing on Syria is to punish the popular base of the Syrian government who stood with or supported the government for 10 years. And now I'm saying this sadly, but the people are increasingly becoming more critical of the government because the government is not able to secure this. But because the people also, they know there are sanctions, but at the same time, they're also in pain. So they're really talking critically about the government that we need like to feed our children. So I understand all these voices. But on a geopolitical or geostrategic level, there were negotiations happening in the past 2 years about redrafting the constitution of Syria, and the United States wants to make Syria more decentralized or less centralized country. So they were proposing reforms, constitutional reform. Syrians were like, okay, let's negotiate about constitutional reforms, but at the same time, you're gonna lift your sanctions, you're gonna withdraw from our country, you're gonna stop this war, etc., in exchange for reforms. And these reforms, constitutional reforms, were supposed to happen before the presidential elections in Syria. And now, since the Syrian government declared that they're going to go for the elections without constitutional reforms, that means the government knows that the American administration, the current one, is not going to back off. So there is no need for giving any compromises to the American side. And knowing that these sanctions are increasing every day. And I want to mention an information, and this is the first time I mention it publicly. I know that they're imposing sanctions on many individuals who are trying to make a trade or even trying to bring medicine to Syria. And they're selling bullshit, telling the people that, there's an exemption for the medicine and the food. That's bullshit. Because when you impose sanctions on the central bank and on the transaction systems on Syria, if you buy something and you can't pay for it, then you cannot bring any goods to Syria. That's a BS. If you want to buy anything from Europe, they will say, if you want to buy medicine from Europe, how are you going to pay for it? Are you going to give cash Syrian pounds to the Europeans or to anyone? No, you're going to do transaction, and there are sanctions on the transaction. And now the information that I have, they're going to impose, they're proposing the Syrian opposition, quote unquote, they're sending lists of names of activists, journalists who are against this regime change war, and they're gonna put these people under scope of the American administration, whether or not they want to impose sanctions on individuals. And my name is on this list. And they want to impose sanctions on these people under the pretext that you are enabling the survival of the Syrian regime. So they're working on it very hard, and they're gonna just turn the lives of the normal people who are just fighting with their words and with their tongues against such a brutal empire. They want to make their lives like hell. I don't really care if they impose on me or not. I'm not really afraid of it, but just imagine if all these people who are supporting Syria now would be like, if they really want to consider imposing sanctions on the people who have just a different opinion. Like, just having an opinion could be a crime, and then they come after us and they tell you, oh, you are with Assad, so you should be a fascist. This is the basic definition of fascism, what the America is doing now, or the administration is doing now with the people around the world, by starving them to death in order to change their political system.
Yeah, it's just the epitome of grotesque cruelty, to impose sanctions on any country, but especially a country like Syria that's been destroyed for over a decade by forces that the US basically imported there, or exported there to there, I should say. And I really, I don't understand why the US, even being an American, I don't understand why the US is so obsessed with regime change in particular countries. I mean, I get the, strategic resources argument. They want the oil. That's obvious, but why do they insist
they're
on
psychopaths.
Like?
Doesn't have to make sense.
I mean, there's some kind of methodology to the madness, and it's like, part of it's like, we're an empire, and we can do it, so we will. And then
it's hegemony,
Yeah,
My friend, they don't need the oil of Syria, practically speaking, and financially. They don't need the oil of Syria. They just want to keep this oil away from the government so that you can't finance your reconstruction. That's just a sadistic way of punishing the people.
I mean, that's basically what I was getting to. It's like, you wear the people out enough. It's like in Gaza, it's like, we're going to put them on a diet, so they're just getting enough calories, so like they don't have enough energy to resist. Like, that's an actual thing. And I feel like that's sort of what the US is trying to do with Syria, is sort of like,
it really is just mostly about power and control.
Ratio them out until they're like, our government can't provide us anything, so we're going to rise up against our government. Like, they're trying to do the same thing in Iran, and it's not going to work. Like,
it's what they do everywhere. They've been working off the same playbook for decades.
Syrians and Iranians aren't
Venezuela.
Stupid. Yeah, Venezuela.
Yep, we're starting to eyeball Cuba again.
What excuse do they have in Venezuela? They have a very good election system there.
Oh, but no, see, it's not. In the United States, we heard that it's not a good election system. It wasn't a fair election. Our elections were fine this time. Joe Biden definitely won, no question. It was a perfect election. But Venezuela, that was not a fair election. It's not, it's different. It's so ridiculous how obvious the propaganda is in this country. But thank you again for coming on. I appreciate it. You're welcome to come back anytime. I knew if you pissed off my stalkers, I knew you were going to be fun to talk to. So this was fun for me.
It would be good to talk again, maybe get more into OPCW and Duma.
Yes, we didn't even get to touch on that.
Yeah.
We didn't get to touch on that.
I know.
We're going to have you back on.
If you guys want to watch my videos on OPCW, I just posted.
I have already. I have already. And we'll link to your channel and stuff in the show notes. So if anybody wants to find that, tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter and all that good stuff so that they can check out your work too.
Yes. It's Kevork Almassian. You can put all my links.
Yeah, we'll just put everything in the description box thing down below. So yeah, thanks again for being here. Thanks everybody for watching, and we will catch you next time.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.